Oh, well, hello there. Welcome back. Okay, let's continue our talk on um, gender and sexuality. So let's talk about globalization and sexuality. So, how do we look at both of these things, right? Again, globalization, if we think about it in just the raw terms, it's about the movement of people and ideas, right? Well, there we go. When it comes to sexuality and the concepts of sexuality, we start seeing the fact that through globalization, we are seeing these ideas and even people being able to move around the world in much greater capacity, right? And it becomes way more dynamic, right? People that are moving around the world that have, again, different ideological practices when it comes to gender or sexuality, they can either find a place or community um, in other parts of the world that are also experiencing this, right? Their knowledge is becoming broadening, but this can also have an impact on other countries that might not agree with those particular practices. So it all comes down to sort of like that spread of information, the dissemination of ideas, right? And this has both benefited and hurt different communities, especially when we think about the LGBTQ community and what they have had to experience. Um, so if we look at a number of different countries where, just being gay could mean that you could find yourself in prison for life or even face the death penalty, right? If you were to go to Nigeria or Yemen or Qatar, um, you might possibly, if you were found out to be gay or trans or whatever, you could face very serious consequences. Um, and there has been sort of this reprisal as American um, television and music and those hegemonic forces are spread throughout the or throughout the world. Um, that has been landing in different countries, and they've been seeing the impact. Right, all of a sudden, these communities that are seeing American TV in which there are gay couples and they are not being persecuted, but they are loved and they are funny, and all of a sudden those communities that someplace in like Nigeria, they they see that as American colonialism, right? That is the colonialism of certain ideologies and ideas. Um, and so there are different countries that have been reacting where the fact that they will shut off internet connection or limit what kind of content actually comes into the country because it is in opposing to their own ideology and practices. Um, so this becomes kind of a big issue, right? As to how these ideas are going to be transmitted around the world and can they have an impact? And we're seeing that they are and will continue to have that impact because globalism can't be stopped, right? And it'll never stop taking place. And those cultures are going to change and adapt to new circumstances. And the thing that's important is what are those changes going to be? What are those influences going to be? And we can see that those different influences are going to have different impacts. If we look at the Catholic Church, right? Well, the Catholic Church has a huge cultural influence around the world. And for those practicing Catholics, um, looking at the LGBT community is problematic. So anywhere that you find those communities, they're going to engage in practices that are typically anti-LGBTQ. So that word, those ideas are going to spread to all those different locations as they have influence. So we have to understand that, how are different opposing influences going to be impacting not only each other, but also the communities that they serve. I think one of the fascinating things, especially when we think about Catholicism, is the current Pope, Pope Francis. Um, Francis has taken a very different approach towards the LGBTQ community than any previous pope ever has, and has also uh, been condemned for it. Um, and one of the things that was fascinating to kind of watch is he came out and he said that, hey, you know, this person who might be gay or lesbian, they are still part of your family, and you should love and respect your family. Didn't say anything about, you know, uh, changing political stance on the LGBTQ, but really was just speaking about individuals within that family and loving them and caring for them and all of those things. But that was a really different approach than what had been the standard sort of approach prior to that. And he received um, a lot of heat because of it from um, cardinals and priests and other parishioners within the church because he took that stance. So, he himself, as a part of this institution, is changing due to global pressures, right? And so that's also important to take a look at, is how are things changing, and even the idea, right? In the United States, one of the main reasons why, if we look at religion and the fact that more and more people are leaving organized religion, a lot of it comes to the fact that the LGBTQ community is becoming more and more influential. And, you might be going to church and then you find out that your brother or sister is gay, or you've got a gay parent, or you have a gay child, and that individual is not welcome within that church. Family ties have a tendency to be a little bit stronger than religious ties. And so people are leaving so that they can, live a happy life with their child and be accepting and all of that. And lots of people are leaving those organizations that aren't as flexible when it comes to these different ideologies. And so for Pope Francis to come out and say that kind of stuff, really fascinating, and it's be really curious to see what happens in the future, as far as the Catholic Church, as far as other major religions. How are they going to adapt to this uh, new reality? So we're going to do a quick exercise here. Based on cultural norms, what do we find to be attractive and not attractive? And I think this is really important to kind of think about, um, because this can sort of inform you about how a culture is going to behave and the things that it values, right? What it expects of a population, right? So how do we see beauty in the private realm, your own home, your own space? How is it conducted in the public realm? And then how do we see beauty in the global realm? So I want you to take a couple of minutes to think about um, how we look at this concept of beauty, right? And what is beautiful when it comes to, not only just the aesthetically pleasing, but how do we define that concept of what is aesthetically pleasing? What do we find attractive in a mate? Um, and then how do we determine that as a culture, and how do we encourage that behavior all of those things, right? So take a couple minutes, write down a response, and think about what do we find attractive in the private realm, in the public realm, and in the global realm. Okay, so we'll pause. Okay, we're back. So let's talk about that for a second. Um, so in the private realm, right, we sort of talked a little bit about this when it came to the creation of um, heterosexuality, and then the Kinsey reports. We have found that um, what we consider to be attractive is oftentimes um, more broad than what we have done in traditional sense. Um, what do you think about what is attractive? What kind of things inform you as to what is attractive to a potential mate, right? So we think about things like clothing, right? What do we find attractive in the home versus in the public realm, right? What do you wear as far as like uh, lingerie, even the concept of lingerie, especially when we think about how it impacts women versus men, right? What is considered sexy for men to wear versus women to wear? What are the costs between those things, right? How do we continue to see influence around that behavior, right? If we think about how many stores are designed around, say, like lingerie, right? Places like Victoria's Secret, um, in which that is what they cater to, sort of this ideology of attractiveness. Um, and then what kind of effort do men put into that, right? So what do we find attractive in the private realm, right? And that kind of behavior and um, how do we conceive of beauty, right? What about the public realm? When we think about the public realm, how do we not only clothe ourselves but mask ourselves? Even things like makeup, right? We are seeing and have had this tradition of women wearing lots of makeup um, to either make the opposite sex attractive or to see themselves as attractive, to put on a face that isn't necessarily their own, or to accentuate attributes that they either have or wish to have, right? And then you have men that rarely, if ever, wear makeup, or engage in things like growing a handsome beard, right, such as this, or engaging in some other behavior. Even today, if we look at different cultures and even concepts like wearing makeup, where you might go to, and I mean, let's just take a look at like K-pop, right? And you've got K-pop in which men, it's common that men are wearing makeup. They are wearing stylish clothing, and in some ways are very antithetical to what you would see as a masculine man in America, right? If you put them right up next to like a lumberjack, right, and that handsome construction worker, right, and the masculine big muscles and stuff like that. mm, We're talking about two different comparisons about what is attractive in different cultural realms, right? Um, and so we're seeing a shift, right? We're seeing that men are actually paying much more attention to skincare. They're paying much more attention to um, this kind of stuff, and we're seeing a shift, right, in this kind of behavior. And it's no longer just a sort of a feminine activity. And at the same time, we're seeing a shift away from wearing things like makeup, where women are showing their natural face. And it's becoming more and more acceptable that there are blemishes that exist. And even then, that sort of public realm to private realm transition, right? You go out in public, there are expectations. You're dating, so you dress up, right? You dress to impress, right? Then you get into a relationship, you end up moving in together, you get married, and then a lot of that stuff just disappears. How does that impact a relationship when you have expectations based on your dating experience and then the reality of cohabitating? How does that change the expectations of a couple, of a community, right? Where those expectations are no longer being met. And that if you have those expectations and that person at home isn't providing them because they can't be on 100% of the time, uh, now we start to see why we have so many interesting problems when it comes to relationships in this country. Expectations versus reality, right? Theoretical reality versus on the ground truth. So think about that as sort of the private realm, what we do there versus what we are capable of doing in the public, um, the things that we find attractive, and how that has changed. Even thinking about, again, even more beauty standards. Like today, if you think about like the swimsuit model on Sports Illustrated, um, that ideology, the super skinny, um, a lot of that is photoshopped, right? But it is created in a way that exemplifies what is some cultural ideology of what beauty should look like, even though in the reality of things, you know, that doesn't actually exist. An example would be like the Barbie doll, right? Um, Barbie for a long time has been not only criticized for um, body expectations, right? Being able to dress up or just the generalized fit, right? Doesn't really exist in human scale, at least not on an average. So when those expectations aren't being expected, what happens with your own personal sense of beauty, of uh, of self worth, right? And we oftentimes associate attractiveness and beauty with concepts like self worth, which is why we have lots of depression in this country because people don't hold themselves up to, or people hold themselves up to unrealistic expectations. And we see those expectations on, with our music and movie stars and television shows. And when all you are exposed to are the beautiful things, reality, right, all of a sudden becomes not quite so great. And so then that even has an impact on sort of the practices of um, mating behavior, right? Going out and meeting someone that is a perfectly good and acceptable mate for you to get to know and then possibly marry and have kids and generate a family and all that stuff. But if they don't meet your high expectations, which you have been taught your entire life, guess what's going to happen, right? Expectations aren't met, and you will pass on a perfectly good opportunity. And so that's also having an impact on how many people are engaging in dating, and we're seeing more and more individuals not dating, even at an early young age. They're seeing that it isn't worth it, right, for whatever reason. And so then let's talk about this in a global realm, and um, things like even racial ideology, right? As we've sort of pushed American ideology out there, and oftentimes that's associated with white actors and white musicians and movie stars, um, print magazines and stuff like that. Even the concept of beauty and things like that get associated with um, that hegemonic force that gets pushed out there. So that we've got countries that are receiving this influence, this hegemonic influence, cultural influence coming from the United States, and it's impacting those concepts of beauty to the point where there are places in like Brazil in which, again, the lighter skin that you have, the more attractive you are, and you have women that are going out and bleaching their skin, or trying to use more makeup to lighten their skin tone because it is seen as more attractive within that community, that culture, because it's being influenced by American hegemonic forces. So even some of those concepts, we have to understand that, again, globalization is putting all of this information, these different ideas out there, and it's having a real impact on different cultures. Um, Even when we don't think about it as sort of important matters like just individual thoughts on beauty and attractiveness, it actually is, right? Okay, so conclusions, right? If we think about um, gender and sexuality, they are not the same, right? Your sex is your biology, the bits and pieces you were born with, um, versus gender, which is culturally constructed, right, and is assigned to um, those traits that you're born with, right? But gender is culturally constructed. Um, it's not binary. Sex is not binary. There are middle sexes. You are born with a chance of getting both or getting parts of either, and that's going to change your biology. That's life. That happens all the time in nature, and we are a part of nature, so it happens to us. So how do we deal with that? How do we deal with that biological experience in culture, right? And how do our doctors and our families and our educational system and our government system, how do they deal with these concepts? And different countries around the world deal with them differently, right? Sometimes you might have a culture in which there are 5 genders, or where you're in the United States and um, you're trying to find out where you fit in personally, um, on whatever spectrum is being created for you to fit into. Um, Gender and power are serious issues that face different communities. The power to control gender and that practice, who has access to resources, even things like marriage, right? Who has access to those resources, who's sharing resources. Um, and we look at the historical importance of gender ideology and sexuality, understanding what has changed, what's not changing, the perception of that, and how things are adapted to depending on what's going on in that community. Um, we've talked about how sexuality and gender is expressed both privately and publicly, right? How do we see things? What do we find attractive? What are the norms and the values that we contend with, both in that private sphere and in that public sphere? It's not just biology. Sexuality is. but it's constructed of culture as well, right? It's how we define ourselves, and our place in society. It's how we organize jobs. It's how we uh, recognize rights of certain people, and what is appropriate behavior uh, given any circumstance. Um, we've also looked at how different binary relationships within one culture, and it's dealing with sexual behavior, is how we have oftentimes been, exposed to that here in the United States. But around the world, there are lots of different ways in which gender and sexuality is being expressed and being experienced, um, and that those options, as um, sort of this global opportunity takes place, then we're going to see more of that. And then if we look at like weddings, that it is an industry, right? And that industry has huge cultural influence because um, the ideas of what is a perfect wedding, and who is the one that's responsible for putting on that wedding, and what are um, the commercial and materialistic influences. Why is a dress going to cost a couple $1,000s versus a rented tuxedo, right? Um, if we think about that as far as like the fairness of it, yeah, there's a lot of things to take in there. And then we've talked about the ideals behind sexuality and how they've changed and continue to as we study and learn more about it. Thinking about the Kinsey reports, thinking about creating language that has never been used before to identify a situation that someone is experiencing, right? And so we do that as far as language in general. We create new terms and to be able to express a new reality. And the thing is that a lot of these realities aren't new. We've got historical evidence and contemporary evidence that people are living lots of different ways around the world. But here and now, we are creating that space, right? Creating that venue by using language to create those spaces. Sexuality and power are still major issues in our lives. Um, it can focus our ideas about rights and property and education. Um, it can indicate how someone sees the sexes and their worth, right? And this can be related to things like, again, um, thoughts about marriage, thoughts about rights and responsibilities, who has control, um, who has the power to make those decisions. Is this a gendered society in which it's the men's decision uh, to do something or not? And this is certainly something that we can see even in generational families within the United States, where you've got the man of the house, right? And they make the financial decisions, they make the big decisions, and you have the woman that is traditionally the homemaker, right? Different rights and different responsibilities, different access to resources, different access to control. And how is that changing to modern day practices and modern day behavior? And then we've also talked about, again, globalization, both in positive and negative ways in which different communities are going to react to different stimuli, whether or not it's the LGBTQ community and their access to media and resources, whether or not it's punishable or whether or not it's encouraged, and sort of those hegemonic forces that are being pushed out by the United States um, when dealing with some of these ideas. And we're seeing lots of influence out there, saying different things, being interpreted by different people, um, and how different cultures and communities are dealing with those issues, right? How do they deal with it? Uh, Important for us to talk about. Okay, that's it. Um, if you have any thoughts or questions, let me know. And hopefully, you learned something about gender and sexuality, and how we as researchers can kind of look at this and try to contemplate what's happening and why it's happening. Um, Again, I think one of the important things to do is to, as a scientist, I am oftentimes looking to try and understand the whys, not necessarily create judgment one way or another, um, towards a given behavior or practice or anything like that. I want to understand why. However, when it comes to things like the LGBTQ community, and communities that are oftentimes either oppressed or have been oppressed, I think it's important to support people, right? And to support their lived experience, right? Um, and that comes from someone who has family that's LGBTQ, and that family is very important to me. So I think it's important to recognize those things and to not always take, the really scientific approach, but also to recognize that we have feelings and thoughts, and we should stand up for things that we believe in. And that's one of those things that I feel personally strong about. So, yeah, there's that. And I hope that uh, you're having a good time. I don't know. Anyway, we'll see you next time. Um, and next time will actually be the final lecture for this semester. So, yeah, good deal. All right. We'll see you then.